Yeah. Before I explain you guys this Oxford-style debate that I've been extremely excited about, is going to be one of the highlights. There's been a lot of highlights. I actually want to comment on what Indrani just shared. And I would like to ask you guys, who has heard of Marco Temporal before? Nobody. It's not. You cannot hear me? Yeah? Okay. I'll try to scream.
Well, team, good luck.
Marco Temporal is a law in Brazil that was discussed by the Senate, by the previous government of Brazil, about 3 years ago, and before that as well. And this law was meant to strip indigenous tribes of their last rights to the land and pave the way for unsanctioned deforestation. Nobody in the international media was talking about it. I am Swiss and Brazilian, so I can read Portuguese, and I had to dive into Portuguese outlets, small Portuguese outlets, speaking about this incredible law, because quite frankly, when I came across it, I was like, well, why are we even bothering here? You know, to Indrani's point, and actually what Ian shared earlier today, I love what Ian said about this pulsing heart when you look at how the weather patterns behave around the Congo Basin, the Amazon rainforest, like the heart of the earth. So I was like, why are we even bothering? And for those of you guys who were already on our newsletter at the time, I started talking about it, contacted Senate members in Brazil. At the end of the day, this law was sort of halted and stopped, and eventually now the current government, unlike Bolsonaro's government, is not going to act on it. So, but the reason I am telling this to you guys, besides the fact that I had quite an emotional moment thinking about that, because I got outraged at the time, is just to reinforce the fact that as here in this room, we can share things that not everybody comes across. Isn't it crazy that the media wasn't talking about something that would be so devastating for our environments globally? And so, you know, for us to come across things like this and share it to our bubbles, and hopefully through our bubbles expand it, I believe is extremely important. I believe that all of us here, you know, have that honor or that responsibility as well. So I wanted to mention that. And yeah, thanks again, both of our presenters. Amazing pitches, both of you. All right, on that somber note, guys, let's move into our last and not least part of the day, which, again, I've been very excited about because at Oxford, I used to debate at the Oxford Union, and this is a format that we had there. And I was thinking before in the break, like, why am I so excited about this last part? I have to say, Jan is looking at me like, yeah, no pressure. Told you earlier. And so I have a memory of a debate we had at Oxford. It was called Silicon Valley Comes to Oxford once a year. These people from Silicon Valley would come and debate in this format that you guys are about to witness today, with the yes side and with the no side. And that year, this was 2011, the motion was, is technology leaving behind the average worker? So there was the CEO and founder of LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman, on one side. There was the CTO of Cisco, Padmasree, a woman at the time, and a few others, yes and no. And I just remember witnessing this discussion and the excitement and the big debates and kind of going like, I can understand both sides, right? Like we're on the same page, but we are arguing about it from different corners. And at the same time, also back then, noticed very clearly how this debate focused on Western geographies. So I actually jumped in and talked about the Global South, which at the time I was unfamiliar with. Ironically, in the investment unit of Top Tier Impact, we covered the Global South mostly. So it's kind of funny to think like, back then there was an early interest, and now we are covering that very actively. It's a very exciting time to be investing in the Global South. But anyway, so I wanted to share with you guys my anecdote of why I'm so excited about this format. I'm going to leave it to our moderator and to our amazing debaters who are ready to take you on a journey today. And it's quite simple. It's basically like having 3 minutes on the yes side, 3 minutes on the no side, and a couple of rounds of those. So I'll leave it to them to take you on this journey.
And I'm really delighted to be here this afternoon and moderating this debate on the topic of can the value of nature be financially quantified? This to me is a really, really fascinating question because, you know, I don't think it's a contentious statement or an assumption that everyone in this room thinks nature is hugely valuable, but that question of whether it's possible to define it in pounds and pence or dollars or whatever currency you want is a totally different question. And given we're at a summit that is all about nature investing, you may assume this debate is a reasonably done deal. But given the caliber of speakers we have on both sides of this debate, I actually think we're in for a very, very lively discussion this afternoon. So you're going to hear from, as mentioned, people that are on the yes side of this and on the no side. So on the yes team, I'm really pleased to be joined by Gilad Goren, who is Executive Director at the Nature Tech Collective, Lynn, a professor of ecology at the University of Cambridge's Conservation Research Institute and Department of Zoology, and Stephanie Race, founder and CEO at the Earth Analytics Group. And then on the no team, we've got Emma Montlake, who is Director of Casework at Environmental Law Foundation, Jan Pachner, Secretary General at One Ocean Foundation, and Marie Takoko, Vice President at Conservation International. Thanks for joining us this afternoon, all six of you. So yeah, without further ado, I'm actually going to throw this straight over to Giles to kick this debate off. And as mentioned, we will have an initial round of 3 minutes per person, alternating between the yeses and the nos. We'll hear from them again and again. So yeah, they'll have plenty of opportunities to make their case. So yeah, Giles, you're up, your first 3 minutes. Do you have a microphone?
I'm subbing over to Lynn, who's going to rock it for us first.
Oh, fine, by all means, please, yeah. You tell me.
I think I've got a microphone. Can you hear me okay? So hi, everyone. Question here is, can the value of nature be financially quantified? And the obvious answer is yes. Yes, it can. And this is why. So there's a very easy way to do it, and it's already been mentioned today, and it happens to be my area of expertise. So I don't know when you last saw a bumblebee. You probably saw one reasonably recently. Maybe you saw a queen in the spring. When you saw her, and it probably was a her, did you say, "Hi, how are you? Thank you for the work you're doing for us"? Because bumblebees are one of many wild bee species. In this country, we have 24 species of bumblebee. There's actually 20,000 species of wild bee in the world. And they are one of the key crop pollinators. Right? So they feed on nectar and pollen. When the flower they happen to be feeding on is a crop that happens to be an insect-loving crop that has a flower that's attractive to bees, the process of feeding delivers this thing called pollination, which is basically the plant reproduction. So I don't know whether you ever thought about this, but flowers are actually plant sex organs, and they're the key to the reproduction. And the reproduction gives you seeds or fruits, which are the things that we eat from agriculture. And therefore, there's a monetary price to that. Now, the role of pollination in the world's food production, it's actually 3/4 of all the world's major food crops are dependent on pollination to some extent. About 1/3 of the food production by volume is dependent on pollination, but each of the individual food crops that depends on pollination has a different level of dependence. And we know that because we can do experiments. There are many experiments. If you bag the flowers before they open, so there's no pollination, you can compare that with what happens with pollination, and you see how much yield is lost. Some crops lose all of their yield if they're not visited by an insect. Normally a bee, but can also be a fly, or in the case of cocoa, it's a small, tiny midge that is the main pollinator. And so some crops, it's all, and that's things like cocoa, vanilla, kiwi fruit, melon, a whole list of crops. Other crops, it's just a small proportion of the yield that they lose, so 40% or 5%. And we know for all of the crops, we have a pretty good estimate of that. And because we know how much of each crop is produced, and we know the price that it's sold for on the market every year, you can just, it's a very simple back of the envelope calculation. You just multiply the level of dependence, which is between 0 and 1, with the price, with the volume, and that gives you a value. And it works out in 2015 US dollars, the last time it was properly worked out in the scientific literature, it's a range between $230 and $577 billion per year. So that's not a standalone value, that's a flow. That's a flow of monetary value that comes down to that bee we started off with. Now, if you've seen me earlier today, I'm too hot to have my jacket on, but I was going to show you. This is a bumblebee, and this species on here is a species of bumblebee called Bombus monticola. It's one of our 24 in this country. It's known as the bilberry bumblebee. It's very rare. It's only found on uplands. It usually visits things like bilberries and other things like heather that flower in uplands. So actually, that species isn't creating this crop pollination value. There might be the odd raspberry that it visits, and the price of bilberry, you can imagine that's quite a small market. So from that species perspective, it's not providing, it's only a very small proportion of that value. And in fact, the value of crop pollination, those hundreds of billions of dollars, that's actually coming from 2% of the species of pollinators you'd find in agricultural landscapes. A whole load of other insects and flies and butterflies and moths are doing more pollination of other, they have all sorts of other values. They have a value, they have a cultural value. They could be cultural icons. Manchester, for example, has a bee as a cultural icon. They could be pollinating plants which are not sold and don't have a market value, but they are, then the seeds that are produced from the pollination of those plants, all those hundreds of thousands of wild plants in the world, those that are pollinator dependent, which is almost 90% of them, they need to produce seeds so that they can recreate their own selves, so they can reproduce, which is part of restoration, which is a fundamental part of ecosystem integrity. That value doesn't have a market price. I'll stop there.
Yeah, perfect. I will throw it over to Team No for their initial 3-minute pitch.
Kia ora tātou. Greetings from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I've actually flown all the way here, 28 hours on a flight, to say that this proposition being put up by our opposition today, did you say something to me? Oh, is a dangerous one. It's an oversimplification of what is a very, very complex issue. And so we're here to say no. And I'll just explain the reasons why. For me, assigning a dollar value to nature, which is a dynamic web of life, is sort of like the idea of making love to this ruler. It's just not going to measure up. I'm going to hand this ruler to the opposition here. Financial models for nature sound great until you realise they use the same algorithms that bought us subprime mortgages, beanie babies, and of course the global phenomenon that is Donald Trump. And if you allow me, I'll tell you a bit of a story about, it's an analogy, which I'm going to allow you to kind of decode. So there was a plane flying over the Himalayas. There were 4 people on board. The engine goes out, but there's only 3 parachutes. The first man, Elon Musk, says, I'm the richest man in the world. My billions of dollars need me. I can't die. So he grabs one of those packs and he jumps out the plane. The second guy, your favourite, Donald Trump, got his name. He says, well, I'm the greatest, smartest vice president of America in history. My billions of sycophant right-wingers need me. I'm not going to die. So he jumps out the plane, grabs a pack, jumps out the plane. The third man, the Pope, turns around to the last passenger, who just happens to be a 10-year-old boy. And he says, look, I'm in my twilight years. Young man, you've got your whole life ahead of you. Take the last pack. The 10-year-old boy turns around to him and says, it's okay, Your Holiness. There's enough parachutes for both of us. The smartest president in American history took my school back. And I'm sharing that because it's kind of an analogy about markets. If you think the engine room of this plane is the markets and it's heading for a crash. So,
Beginning of it
just
right
like
there.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So think about that, because sometimes the smartest people in the room or the smartest people in the world do dumb shit. And that's what I want to propose today, that in fact, putting a value to nature only using financial metrics is not enough. In New Zealand, we go beyond financial metrics. As an Indigenous people, we have reframed our wellbeing economy that actually puts a value to intrinsic aspects of life as we know it. We look at ecology, we look at social impacts, we look at other wellbeing impacts, the environmental impacts. So this idea that you can put a financial value to nature is not sufficient. I'm going to leave it there and let my teammates also share their arguments. Kia ora.
Thank you, Mary. Giles. So, yeah.
I'm not sure where this went, so I don't know. Exhibit A. Well, I'm glad you took this new tone where you're not talking about can it, but should it, because that means our side has already won. So it can be. We know that. We're putting that to the side. Question is, should it? Okay. Every system needs to have a language for coordination. Computers. I mean, think of the crazy stuff that's coming out of computers. Right? Multinational systems, we have friends from Moody's here, are enabled by the internet and computers. The craziest stuff, even like unlimited cat videos on YouTube, all coming to us from computers, right? Computers are just zeros and ones. It's just 0 and 1. I mean, how many people have met via dating apps, right? How many life-changing or life-saving medicines have been created because of the power of AI and computers, right? That's all happening in zeros and ones. So we need to have that language. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on you asking, because there's all kinds of people in this room, our system's also zeros and ones, and a dollar sign next to it. Not euros or pounds, really, dollar signs. Because that's just how it works. So in effect, money is, I mean, it's in the word. It's currency, right? It is basically energy. And where the money goes, the energy is. When the energy is, the interest is. And if you don't put money value, monetary value on nature, the energy is just not going to go there in this given system. Now, maybe we're going to have a Che Guevaran revolution that's going to uphold the entire thing, and we're all going to be in a moneyless nibbana, insta-karma, but probably not by 2030. And if you don't do something about it by 2030, what was the word that Chris said? We're all screwed, we're all fucked. Which one? Either way, you get it, right? So not only do we have to do this, and should we do this, but we should be using the latest nature tech technologies. We should be utilizing the innovations that are coming from our friends in nature finance and nature fintech, the tools that they are bestowing on us in order to actually get money going in the right way, right? And we need to do this right now. Otherwise, yeah, we're not going anywhere fast. Not even to the Himalayas.
Thanks, Gilad. Who next from the No team? Emma, you would like to go?
Yes, thank you. So I grew up in suburban Surrey in this country, and when I was growing up, we had bullfinches aplenty in the garden, we had a lot of insects, we had a spotted flycatcher that used to come every year and nest in the garden. And then one year it didn't come. Anyone like me who grew up in the 70s with any interest in nature at all will have seen and witnessed with their own eyes the catastrophic decline in species that we have with us today. Kent Wildlife Trust estimate that we have lost in this country 78% of our insect numbers. The RSPB estimate that 40 million birds have disappeared from our skies in the last 50 years. These are catastrophic numbers, truly frightening. Nature is priceless, and those losses cannot be calculated. As has already been said, there are many different ways to judge and appreciate value, and money is only one of those. I believe that nature has its own intrinsic rights to exist and to thrive and to flourish, and that you cannot put a financial value on that. I also believe that we have a moral responsibility to protect nature. In the same way that legally we are no longer permitted to buy and sell a human life, so we need to stop thinking of nature as merely property and the preserve of the owner to do with it as it will. I would characterise our relationship with nature as an abusive one. We pollute, we extract, we burn, we hew, we fell, we kill, without giving anything back to nature. Our environmental laws, I'm an environmental lawyer, are really not working. They're there not to protect, but merely to mitigate the harm that is caused through our actions. So what we need is a paradigm shift. We need to start thinking about nature in its own right, not as apart from humans. We are nature. Nature is us. And we need to rethink how we conduct our relationship with nature. Moving from a human-centric to an ecocentric understanding of the world and our place in it. And following the lead of indigenous cultures and knowledge, we must re-establish humans as part of nature, not apart from it. After the Second World War, when humanity was in such calamity, out of the ashes was born the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I believe that we are now facing just such a catastrophe of nature, and that we need to institute and establish similar rights for nature. And there is a growing movement globally. Mia can talk about that as well. Governments are starting to codify nature's rights into law. There are now 270 different examples of this around the world. Ecuador famously in 2008 included nature's rights in its new constitution, and in New Zealand the Whanganui River has been granted the right of personhood, such as, and similar to corporations and ships also have such rights. We have to rethink our relationship with nature, and making it a source of profit is not the way. Nature is not a commodity to be traded. It is to be cherished and protected for its own sake and for our sake, and actually, more importantly, for nature's sake.
Okay, Stephanie, your 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm going to reframe the question. Yes, nature can be quantified, both in the biophysical context and in the financial context. Although the no side of the argument makes a lot of broad statements that hit us in the heart, the world works through its existing market infrastructure, not through environmental services markets, not through carbon markets, not through biodiversity markets. Having the right ethos behind why we're doing what we're doing to reverse our patterns of destruction as humans is one thing. Getting behavior to change is quite another. I'm an entrepreneur. I founded my company 15 years ago in Silicon Valley, the example that was used previously about the Oxford debates. I went from Wall Street to 25 years in Silicon Valley to cow shit and carrots in East Anglia. You show me another entrepreneur, one of my contemporaries, that has taken the same professional risks as myself. There is no one. If I look at any of my competitors, and there are some that are here today, there are only a few that are in their 50s. Why? Because it's a folly. Why is it a folly? Revenue has been a nightmare in this sector. None of the startups know this. None of the investors that are sector specific understand this. Why? Because they're all new to the space. So I will just tell you, I'm going to reframe the question. I had the same gumption to say we need to do the right thing for the environment. I created a company that is the data services provider for raw material ingredient sourcing. It's run by GS1. The last 4 digits of every barcode of anything you buy in a supermarket is my number. I started my company thinking we needed to create an environmental index for the production of food and consumer products, that we needed to quantify everything within the farm gate and bring this through to the balance sheet. Everyone looked at me like I was crazy. Why would you do that? Why are you going to go work with the farmers? They don't have any money. We landed our first contract with ConAgra Foods. What happened? They said, Stephanie, this is great. We can monitor greenhouse gas emissions and carbon sequestration from the production of potatoes that go into French fries. Do you really think that people at McDonald's are going to pay more for carbon neutral French fries versus the full Monty? You got to be kidding me. So I'm sitting there with the chief procurement officer and the CFO of this frozen potato company. And prior to that, I was running Accenture's food and consumer products business, so I sort of knew the industry. Now, here's the thing. He said, what matters to me most is minimizing disruptions in the supply chain. Why? Because I got a pension. I've got quarterly earnings. This is the reality I'm living in. If you could give me the environmental data for marketing purposes, it's fantastic. But what I need to do is keep my earnings per share at this level. So I took some notes before today. We're supposed to prepare for a debate. When I say reframing the question, is natural capital can be relatively straightforward for those familiar with what it is, which is everyone in this room, because I've been listening to you all talk about it for 4 hours, which is great. However, examples on how to properly price externalities, and I'll use food production as the example with agriculture, into the true cost of food is relatively a novel concept, not just for farmers, because they do a bunch of things, but they don't account for anything properly. Why? Because they're busy. Why? Because they get subsidized to do things, both positively and negatively, and it doesn't show up in their balance sheet or income statement. How do I know? Because I've been trolling around, not just the UK and the United States, but the global South. So what is wrong is we need to essentially educate the VPs of procurement, the CFOs, and the boards of food and consumer products companies to understand that by enhancing soil health, the nutrient use efficiency of crops and livestock, improving water quality, biodiversity, and habitat, provide an efficient use of resources, they manage risk and cost, as well as create these environmental benefits, which can be quantified in the context of avoided loss and damage, which, by the way, I know we're almost...
I was going to say, I've been...
Okay, which, by the way, is a real thing. Once you have rainstorms, and then you get erosion, and then you have a fireball come through your orchard or your vineyard, what are you going to do? So the point is we need to link natural capital accounting to manage the cost and risk to these land-based industries so that we can get the efficient sourcing of raw materials into the supply chain, and we have to price food accordingly and price consumer products accordingly. We only have the economy to work within, and this is the challenge and the opportunity, and we're out of time. So we've got to figure it out, and we've got to figure it out now.
No. Okay. I will, yeah. Yeah, and your final kind of from the initial speaker on the first round, please.
Thank you very much. I start off with a question. I think we heard it before. It's an assumption. We are part of nature. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So if we're part of nature and we put a price tag on nature, then we should put a price tag on each and one of us. Who is worth more? You? 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 I think we've been there in history, right? And it's not a very bright page of our history. So I think this is a very difficult and very dangerous question. We're talking about nature being a part of all of us, and it's common, right? So here we're talking about putting a price tag on something, which means it's becoming, we're privatizing nature. Who's going to get profit on this? You put a price tag on it, who's going to get profit? I think there's a really dangerous area that we're moving into. And I think all the discussions that we heard on the question, I think there's a straight no. If we want to consider something, probably we might go into services that nature provides for our needs. Because all the rest, I think, is a very anthropogenic way of putting things. And again, we are almost like, one of our issues is we're always putting, what brought us into this space, what brought us into all these issues that we have in our environment, is that we are basically always putting ourselves up front. We're always putting ourselves as a human race somewhere playing God, trying to resolve one problem, creating 10 other ones. And I think that's one of these issues. We're trying to resolve another problem that we created with a solution that we've been creating. And I'm not really sure that this is going to get us anywhere, rather than raising other issues. And so the whole framework, I think, needs to be clear. I'm coming from the ocean space, and we can put a price tag on something that we know. Now, if I make a question, do you think we know enough about the ocean? Scientifically, we know about 15%, 10 to 15% of what's happening underneath the surface. So how are you going to put a price tag on this? Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Very poignant question to end on that. So that's our first round. What's going to happen now is each of our speakers has the opportunity to reply to the initial points that have been made. I'm going to be stricter this time. I was quite easy going with all of you then. So let's say maybe we'll aim for about 2 minutes now for these replies. So, okay, we'll go back to the yes team. Who wants to dive in first?
I'll go.
Go on then.
Try to knock out one by one.
I like this guy.
This whole thing about modern slavery, right? It's called GDP. What is GDP? It's a measure of per person productivity wrapped up to a state. So we do this anyways. First of all. Second of all, you were talking also about we don't have enough data. We don't have enough science. You're absolutely right. Do you know why? Because there wasn't enough interest from an economic reason to spend money into the oceans. If we could revert or invert and actually what Chris was talking about earlier today about bottom trawling being banned because we're showing that by conserving, we're sequestering carbon. That can't happen without this financial system to enable this. That is the quickest way to making what your dreams are, where we'll know oceans done. All right, and you were talking a lot about shoulds. I like shoulds. There's a lot of shoulds. We should do this. We should do that. Reality hits, boom. Doesn't matter what we should be doing. Not within this given system. So like, we just need to be real. And I'm not trying to knock out anyone who's being naive or puts nature as sublime and ineffable. Believe me, I'm there with you. Literally, nothing takes my breath away more than seeing my kids running around the woods next to our house, playing like they're the hunters from Peter and the Wolf. I don't know why they like it. It's addictive. The point is, though,
Got good music.
it's fantastic music. Better than the Frozen soundtrack. The point is, though, we're not saying value nature. And actually, this is where Jan and I actually connect. And that was going to be my point beforehand, so thank you for the segue. It's not necessarily putting a value on a crystal clear lake or on a tree. It is on the ecosystem services, 100%. But that has to have an absolute price. And that is how we get it on the CFOs. Now, Greta might not like this. She can't yell about $55 trillion. It's going to be gone. It's not a sexy poster. But if we take that number, which is 55% of the global GDP disappearing if nature goes, right? And then we bring it down to the level of an individual CFO and be like, hey, bro, you're not going to have coffee in 10 years. That gets them shaking in the booties. And that's when actually the action will actually take place. So with all due respect, ineffable, sublime, nature, loyalty, love, we're not putting a price on that. But we have to be realistic and we have to do it now.
Yeah. Great. No team who wants to go in response? Mary, thanks.
Okay, I might have been a bit of a plane crash of my own in round one, but let me respond to the round one speakers. So just to lay it out, I mean, I don't really hear any arguments there that convinced me that you can put a price to nature. And let me just be straight up. You know, I've been developing a nature market. What is a nature market? Nature markets are all about putting a value to nature so that the markets will, you know, see the investment opportunity with this emerging class of natural assets. I don't hear really, you know, this team talk about that, but I can talk about it as a developer. From my own experience, I can also talk about the shortfalls of trying to assign a value to this emerging class of natural assets. We are working with a reef to ridges approach. We have been developing seagrass, mangroves, native forests, seaweed projects, right through to the whales. It's an amazing project called Hina Monahalo. We've been working with the #1 nature economist in the world, Dr. Ralph Shami. We've been working with the #1 scientist, Dr. Carlos Duarte. But even with the world-class team that we have and an ecosystem of 35 partners from across the world and New Zealand, our Indigenous-led project to design a nature market is still falling short. And the reason why is because the intangible world cannot be measured. You know, how can you put a price tag to my sacred mountain? My sacred mountain, Hukirangi, was the mountain that Maui himself fished up the waters of New Zealand. Is the market ever going to recognise the sacred value of that mountain? The answer is no. So when we think about financialisation of these new assets,
10-second warning,
we
Mary.
have to be very, very, very careful that we use other metrics that can ensure that the holistic, intrinsic aspects of nature, its dynamism, are valued. So all I want to say, last point, is that you cannot assign a price tag to nature because nature is priceless.
Go, Lynn, 2 minutes.
Good.
I don't think we disagree about that. I think that we are team pragmatism over here. We're saying that you can't put a value on all of nature, but you absolutely have to put a financial value on some of it because otherwise it'll disappear. And I heard a lot of really nice sounding ideas there about how alternative ways we might protect nature, but I don't think any of them really cut it. As Gilad said, I think, you know, the prospect is that we will just get rid of all of nature if we don't find a way to value it. For example, so Emma, you were talking about introducing a crime. There's been a lot of discussion about a crime of ecocide and the idea that that might stop companies or countries from destroying their own nature. I don't believe it would. We all agree around the world that genocide is a bad idea, and we've made it an international crime, and it's still happening, and it's quite appalling. So that doesn't really cut it. And I also wanted to pick up on something. There was a study published in 2007 where a couple of really good scientists tried to put a value on all of insects. So you were talking about insect decline in this country. I work on insect decline. They just went through running the numbers to see what, if you did all the ways of valuing that we have and applied it to the insects in the United States, what's the monetary value? And they looked at pollination, they looked at dung burial in ranches, and they looked at pest control, and they also looked at recreational value that's created by insects. The price tag was $58 billion a year, but 90%, close to 90% of the value was recreation, which is really surprising. And the reason was because when they ran the numbers, it's bird watching, fishing, and hunting that creates the bulk of the value for insects because of all of the animals that humans connect with and love that feed on insects. So the point here is that what we need to do is be talking to those companies that are manufacturing really high-tech binoculars and angling equipment, you know, and letting them realise that their whole business depends on an aspect of natural capital, which is providing insects that retains the recreational activity that their customers want to take part in.
Perfectly timed. Well done. Okay. Who won the no team? Yes?
Just to respond to Lynn, actually I wasn't talking about ecocide, which is a reactive strategy to biodiversity destruction. I was talking about rights of nature, which is a proactive and at the front. That's fine. But they're in the same ballpark. But one of the things I just wanted to say, and staying within that same realm of rights of nature, and talking about the fact that we have to stay within the real world with this, was something that's happening here in London with a company called Faith in Nature, is that they have actually brought nature onto the board. And they have appointed 2 lawyers from an organisation called Lawyers for Nature and the Environmental Law Centre in America. And they have 2 people on the board who represent the voice of nature. And I think, going forward and working within the real world, that is something really tangible that we can all think about, where our companies are making decisions, and if they had somebody representing nature to speak for nature, then perhaps different sorts of decisions will start to be made. I just wanted to pick that up because within the rights of nature remit and the rights of personhood, there is also this other part that is starting to be played. I think it's really exciting. I think we should all be taking note.
Thank you, Emma. Okay, Stephanie, would you like to round out? 2 minutes, thanks.
The no side has made a lot of humanitarian arguments, and I wouldn't necessarily call arguments when we are having a debate. I think having a spiritual perspective on this set of issues is really important. I'll just say that. And unfortunately, the real world, at least the world that I have to live in every day, lacks this dimension. And I think the no side has come up with a high a high bar in terms of how we actually implement that in the context of my customer base. I just think about how am I going to take that back and put that into action. If I look at my customers, Fortune 50 publicly traded companies, they have one set of objectives. The family-owned and operated mid-cap companies that we do business with, we make a little bit more progress in this regard, but we still have to deliver business value with everything that we deliver. So back to the argument. People operate on two different dimensions, and maybe this is, completely an oversimplification, but I'll just say it. It's fear or greed. I have an English CFO, and he basically tells me every day, unless we can show these people how they're going to lose everything or how they're going to make a lot of money, they're not going to move. This goes to the investment community as well as our customers. So pricing the avoided loss and damage associated with ecosystem services has become a core part of our go-to-market. Somebody asked me, you've had this water quality monitoring capability for 10 years. Why aren't you doing it in the UK? And the answer to that is because the legal framework in the UK isn't really implemented. In California it is. Why? Because there's an oversupply of lawyers in the legal system. There's a lot of money behind the legal system in California. So good on us. We've had an opportunity to actually implement and develop a pretty sophisticated set of technologies to manage systemic risk. And in 2017, the fires broke out in the middle of our water quality monitoring project. So what are we doing now? Full-scale ecosystem restoration, looking at systemic risk, not just with fuel risk reduction for fires, but post-fire water quality management and the restoration of farmland to try and trick the avocado trees into producing twice as much fruit because they lost half the production in the fires. So we're at a point in the biophysical world where things have fast forwarded to the point where all this is really happening. Maybe you don't see it in the UK like we see it in California. I do live in both places, and there is a marked difference in terms of the physical reality and how it's affecting not just people's quality of life, but their ability to function. I told a man in a Ferrari with a Gucci gas mask, you can't eat your money after the fires. And he just looked at me and he says, you're right, we can't get a cup of coffee. We're both at the same level. So that's what's to come, and I don't think most people realize that. And so although I applaud the aspiration of the No team, I think we have to bring this back to some middle ground of what can be done.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, yeah, final 2 minutes to make your case. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Okay. I'll try to sum it up. The question was, can the value of nature be financially quantified? The question is no. Can the value of natural services be quantified? The question would probably be yes. On the services that nature provides to us as humans, on what we basically need, right? So I think we all agree that the value of nature is really priceless. And I think we heard from the yes side, we heard some examples that actually would open up an interesting, spectacular picture when we hear about bumblebees. There are certain bumblebees that make amazing services to nature, but then there are other bumblebees that make probably no services to us. It's all interconnected, and maybe they are important to some, I don't know, some bird, but probably not really to us. So what price tag put you on? One is worth 100, the other one is worth 10 because it provides less services. It's a really dangerous ballgame. And I think that's really underlines and underpins the importance of that question and also the consequences that that question has. And so we believe that it's impossible to put a price tag on it. It's much more complex. We have to start to think of a systematic approach. We are part of a system. Everything is interconnected. And the moment you start to take yourself out of that system and try to put a value on it, you're again doing exactly the same mistake that brought us here in this first instance.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Thank you to all 6 of you for making some very strong arguments there. So we've heard compelling arguments on both sides. I would say a few I've noted down. You know, on the yes side, we had right at the beginning talking about how 3/4 of the world's crops are dependent on pollination, which clearly has a massive financial value. the importance of having the right language to talk about these issues in order to make the system work and drive that investment, and that language is money a lot of the time. And also, Stephanie's point, people often act on fear and greed, which I do agree with, unfortunately. So you have to talk about these things in terms of profit and loss. On the no side, though, equally some strong arguments. One of my favorites, comparing it to making love to a ruler, so in terms of trying to quantify it in financial terms. And when we do this, we get things like subprime mortgages, banking crises, etc. Do we want the same thing to be done in nature? Also, a really interesting example we were given around, nature, the voice of nature being on boards. That's something that's tangible, but it's not a financial thing necessarily. To make something tangible, it doesn't necessarily have to be quantified in financial terms, and so many others we could talk about. But let's get to the crucial point here. How this is going to work is I'm going to pose the question to all of you in the audience. Do you think the value of nature can be financially quantified? And if you think yes, you will clap, or if you think no, you will clap when I prompt you. So firstly, can the value of nature be financially quantified? If you think yes, please clap now. And if you think the answer to that question is no, please clap now. I wish I had some scientific equipment to properly measure this. I think the no's had it then. Yeah? Do we think? So yeah, the answer we've come to is it can't be, which has surprised me, I have to say, given the theme of today. But I don't think we're meaning we can't do something about it, thankfully. I'm going to make that assumption. No, but thank you to all of our panelists. And yeah, I will hand back over to our lovely audience. Thank you.